Hi, my name is Patrick Virgadamo. I'm a senior attorney at the Louisiana Legislative Auditor's Office, and this is Module 3, the Louisiana Procurement Code. So, the Louisiana Procurement Code, similar to the public bid law, is the purpose for state agencies on the means and requirements they have to do when buying, purchasing, renting, leasing, or obtaining supplies, services, or major repairs. It does not include public works, which are subject to the public bid law, which was covered in Module 2. The procurement code, basically the Office of State Procurement, is the state's central agency who is responsible for standardizing, facilitating, and supervising the procurement of these goods, services, major repairs, and travel that's required by state agencies. OSP is also responsible for reviewing and approving our requests for proposals and contracts for professional services, whether they're professional, personal, consulting, or social service contracts. As the state central purchasing agency, OSP is responsible for facilitating statewide cooperative purchasing opportunities. So statewide contracts that can be used by all state agencies, and in some cases, extending those opportunities to local governments and quasi-public agencies. As far as the Louisiana Procurement Code, certain entities are made exempt. The legislative branch and its agencies, the judicial branch, as well as all local political subdivisions and quasi-public entities. These entities must instead follow the public bid law, which was covered in Module 2, and governs the purchases of public works and materials and supplies for these entities. Again, note, state agencies of the executive branch for public works must also follow the public bid law, as it is not included within the scope of the procurement code. Local political subdivisions and quasi-publics can, however, adopt all or any part of the Louisiana Procurement Code and its regulations for the procurement of supplies, services, and major repairs. A summary of the Louisiana Procurement Code can be found on the LLA's website. However, our focus today is primarily going to be on those situations where exempt agencies, specifically local political subdivisions, utilize the procurement code and those contracts that OSP has put together as an exception to the public bid law. A governmental body exempted from the procurement code can use the code whenever the best interests of that entity and the state are served. Local entities may formally adopt the procurement code by passage of an ordinance or resolution, and they may do it again in all or in part. Now, purchases off state contracts, which do not require the local entity to actually adopt the procurement code, is an exception under the public bid law, which specifically allows political subdivisions to purchase off of existing state contracts without bidding out the purchase. When doing so, the political subdivision should document all of the following in their contract file. First, they need to make sure whatever the applicable state contract number is documented in their file so that when they're saying they're purchasing off of a state contract, they can show what that state contract was, a description of the item that they're purchasing off of the state contract, and then an invoice of some sort that documents the item that was purchased, including description, to show that it is, in fact, the item that's identical to the one under the state contract. All of these should be documented and maintained in the contract file so that when questioned later why the entity did not bid out the purchase, they're able to show that they utilized the state contract and that it in fact was utilizing that state contract. We recommend that documentation include something, whether it be an ordinance resolution or just a recorded motion in that public entity's minutes, to show this is why we didn't bid it out. We are utilizing this state contract, so that there's a record in your record, so that when someone is reviewing to determine why you didn't bid it out, they're able to make that determination easily that it's because you use the state contract. Now, one other exception that applies is if an item is available under a state contract. The law, specifically in revised statute 39:1710, allows a local political subdivision to buy the same item that's currently on a state contract, but instead of using the state's vendor, they can purchase it from a local vendor. A local as the AG has noted, is not defined in the statute. However, it should mean that that vendor is situated within the boundary of that governing authority, of that political subdivision. So it's not that they're in the same state, it's that they're basically within your parish, within your city, whatever that entity's jurisdictional borders are. And so they are truly a local vendor. And it's important to note the price has to be the same or lower than what is currently available on the state contract price. It should be noted that the vendor, that local vendor, can charge an additional amount under the law for shipping, preparing, and delivery of the item, and that amount fluctuates depending on the total purchase price. They can charge an additional 7% of the state contract price for any purchase up to $10,000. So, for example, if the state contract price is $8,000, the total cost with additional charge cannot exceed $8,560, which basically is the $8,000 for the item and a $560 additional charge. That amount decreases to 5% when that purchase is greater than $10,000, but not more than $20,000. So in that example, if the state contract price is, for instance, $15,000, a total cost with additional charge may not exceed $15,750. Again, $15,000 for the item under the state contract and an additional charge of $750. Finally, if the purchase price is over $20,000, that amount of additional charge decreases to 3% of the state contract price. So in that example, if a state contract price is, say, $50,000 for that item, the total cost with additional charge in this case could not exceed $51,500. Again, $50,000 for the item and $1,500 as an additional charge. The Attorney General, in giving guidance on how to utilize the provision of 39:1710, has stated that a political subdivision using this exception to the public bid law has to do the following things. First, they need to determine from OSP, which is the State Central Purchasing, if there is a competitive bid contract for what that needed material supply is, and get the contract number and the specifications of what the item is under the state contract. Then, having that information, they can then contact local vendors to determine if they can provide that same identical, exact same specific item and attain a price quote for delivery to them, to the political subdivision. Now, while the statute provides no definition for local, again, as we noted, the AG in interpreting this has said the context should mean that vendor is situated within the jurisdictional boundaries of the political subdivision seeking to make the purchase. Again, it's not just that they're in the same state, but they're actually in the same city, parish, or locality. Now, once they've identified that vendor as having it, then they have to make sure that if the delivered price offered is within the percentages set forth, as we discussed, the 7% if it's below 10, if it's more than 10 but less than 20, the 5%, or the 3% if it's over 20,000, they have to make a determination if that reflecting the contract, state contract information, and all that information matches, then they can proceed with obtaining that item. They need to make sure they document everything, including the contract number, the contract specifications, the contract price that's under the state contract, and what the markup is that's allowed by the local vendor. And all of that should be in their contract file. Now, the final step that the AG has noted is that political subdivision must provide a copy of the purchase order to OSP, as OSP is required to monitor compliance with the provisions of 39:1710. All of these steps should be completed before the political subdivision takes delivery of the item. And remember, this is an exception to the public bid law, which otherwise would likely require you to bid out a purchase. So you must meet all of these requirements in order to use that exception. The other main exception that comes into play involves issues with state contracts and items on state contract is that political subdivisions are provided an exception under the public bid law for purchasing items off of the Federal General Services Administration's price list. These price lists can be thought of as OSP does state contracts. the General Services Administration does the similar thing as essential purchasing for federal agencies. And what the legislature has done in the law is say, you as a political subdivision, instead of bidding out a purchase, if that item can be obtained under a federal GSA price list, you can use it. However, there are caveats. In order to purchase off of that, two things have to be met. First, the item cannot be cheaper under an available state contract, which is why it's important for the political subdivision to first reach out to Office of State Procurement to determine if that item is available and what the price is. And then finally, the political subdivision has to use a Louisiana licensed dealer or distributor. This doesn't mean that the entity has to be located in Louisiana. They just need to be registered to do business in the state as a licensed dealer or distributor. If it's a vehicle, they may require specific licensing in order to sell to someone in the state. What we'll try to go through now is for political subdivisions, because either of these exceptions are necessarily going to require you to utilize the Office of State Procurement's website and those resources for state contracts, is to show you how you can use the Office of State Procurement's website to get those information you need, either to purchase from the local vendor or to help determine if you can use a federal GSA price list. So the Office of State Procurement's website, if you can go to it through the Division of Administration's website, doa.la.gov. On that, you'll find in the bottom right of that website contact information, which will be important to you in you going through this process. You'll note first and foremost that the Procurement Help Desk for purchasing provides an email address, which can be helpful if you need to reach out to someone to help determine if something's under a state contract and what those prices are, as well as a phone number. It's important to note, and we'll talk about this as we look through some of the examples, not all state contracts will necessarily have that item as an item. Some cases, state contracts may provide for catalog contracts, which basically provide a discount off of all of the items that particular vendor provides. And so it's important to not just rely on what you see or don't see in trying to determine if something's available under state contract, but reach out to Office of State Procurement when in doubt to get some specific information. The other important link that you'll see is in the bottom left of the screen, which has the ECAT current state contracts, where you can look up electronically the current state contracts that are out there for materials and supplies. Now, when you go to ECAT, you're going to see basically a screen that gives you an ability to search for descriptive items for the contract, the specific vendor, specific line items under a contract, and then just catalog items, as we talked about, where it may be these things are just included in a catalog of products that that vendor provides. When utilizing this, for example, you're going to get results. So example, if you looked up vehicles as your search term for just a contract line item, you're going to get a result list that gives you both contract numbers, contract descriptions, vendor names, a T number that OSP uses, and then important, the effective dates of that contract. Because you can't, even though that contract may be there, if you can't execute your procurement within that period of time, you may not be able to use that contract. And so it's important to note, when does that contract expire and when is it good? Now, to see the actual information about a contract, you only have to click on the contract number, which will take you to informational screen about that contract. It's important to note you'll see things that specifically include the contact information for the Office of State Procurement, as well as vendor information on the state's vendor for that contract. Now, if you click on the contract information, you'll actually see a summary that gives you all the information on the contract, which includes some of that information that we've already seen, which is that buyer information, the OSP contact, the vendor's information, as well as how long the contract's in effect for. In this case, it's good until October 31st of this year. You'll also find information on the specific vehicles in this case, where they will tell you a specific health information that when you're buying vehicles, which is one of the most common things bought under state contract, you're able to see specifically the line items under the contract and what those makes and models are under the state contract. It'll also note any amendments that have been made to that contract. It's important to note that only the state Office of State Procurement can make amendments to that contract. So if it's not available under the state contract, unless they agree to amend it, you won't be able to use that state contract for those things outside of what it currently provides for. Now, some guidelines that are available, if you go to the featured contract section of the Office of State Procurement's website, you're going to find some helpful information about featured contracts. Vehicle contracts are one of the types of featured contracts, and you're going to find specific information that OSP requires anytime you're using a state contract for vehicles. The instructions, when you go to this, will give you instructions for both state agencies, political subdivisions, and what information you need to do and who you should contact regarding those contracts. In our cases, as a political subdivision, you'll click on the instructions for political subdivisions, which will give you information on what you need in order to make those purchases. It provides where you need to use the order sheets that are available to use from that state, from the state vendor, the contact information for delivery, as well as what's things that need to be on the purchase order, including that contract number, the line item, how many you need, all the specific details that are provided for. OSP strongly suggests that completed order sheet that you submit a completed order sheet with the purchase order so that it ties it together and makes it clear. And they also strongly suggest that an order confirmation or acknowledgement be obtained from the dealer so that you're not thinking you purchased something and then you didn't actually do that. If you do not use a formal purchase order, it is important to note that OSP says that you should submit your order on letterhead of the political subdivision. This is so they know who is purchasing it. The dealer, under the instructions, will then notify you when the vehicle is ready and for doing an invoice for payment. If you're notice OSP notes that if you're using a local dealer, you have to furnish a copy of the purchase order to them, and they provide you the contact information for submitting that, as the AG has noted is required. For example, if we're looking for a sports utility vehicle, this information will specifically show you what the state contract allows for and give you a link to the order sheet, as well as when the cutoff dates are because of the termination of the contract to make purchases. You'll notice if you click on the order sheet here, when we're looking at compact SUV, it brings you up the order form, which is a fillable form to basically show you what are the available options under that contract, as well as putting in the information you need in order to have the vendor generate the purchase. Below the vehicle contracts, you'll also see vehicle-related contracts, which include contracts for fuel, as well as some other things for vehicle repairs, tires, servicing, and things of those sorts. So those may be other state contracts you may be interested in if you're purchasing vehicles. Quasi-publics, in some cases, may have the ability to use it. However, they need to reach out to the Office of State Procurement to make sure that they follow all the things they need to do. In utilizing this, both political subdivisions and quasi-publics, if your entity is not already registered with the Office of State Procurement, there is a state contract questionnaire, as well as some information that has to be obtained by the Office of State Procurement. If you go to where it says the list here, it will take you to the information you need to see if your entity is already registered. As far as the state contract questionnaire, assuming you need to fill it out in the first time, this form, which assuming will eventually be updated for the new administration, provides for you to put the name of your organization, your contact information, and all the things that support your ability as a political subdivision or a quasi-public to utilize these state contracts. It's important to note that that list can then be used to look up and see. I would strongly suggest, even if your entity has previously registered, you may want to see if your information is out of date and provide updated contact information to Office of State Procurement. OSP may also establish what are called Louisiana multiple award schedules that are based on federal general service administration contracts and make those available to both state agencies and locals. In addition, there are national cooperative organizations that may have contracts such as NASPO, Sourcewell, Omnia, and such, that generally speaking, unless you have specific exceptions under public bid law, which Angela would have discussed in Module 2, you're normally not allowed to use unless they were originally done by a Louisiana public entity. What the Office of State Procurement has the ability to do is, in some cases, those may be adopted as a state contract and therefore then become available for use by political subdivisions and quasi-public agencies. It should be noted, however, that when the OSP adopts these contracts, they do not always adopt all of the contracts by these organizations, but may in fact only adopt a single contract from their price list, or even a part of a contract from these price lists. And so it's important to know exactly what that contract provides for as a state contract if you're using it as an exception to the public bid law. Using the Office of State Procurement's website, it's important to understand there's some acronyms that are used quite heavily on the website. OSP for the Office of State Procurement, the OA obviously for the Division of Administration, but you may see things where it's the CPO, Chief Procurement Officer, so whoever is your chief purchasing person for your political subdivision. Delegation of purchasing authority, which is more important for state agencies because in some cases they may not have purchasing authority unless it's delegated to them. You will also see GSA, as we talked about, the General Services Administration, ITB for invitation to bid, the LAMAS, which are those multiple award schedules using the GSA or those cooperative purchasing organizations, contracts that are adopted by the state, the Louisiana Pricing Schedule, which is kind of their version of the GSA, and then the Louisiana Procurement and Contract Network, LAPAC, which allows some contracts where they've jointly contracted or joined in on other contracts. And then finally, ECAT, which is the electronic catalog we talked about and looked at, where you can pull up contract information to obtain it. I would still strongly suggest, even if you pull that information and put it in your files, you may still want to have some kind of email confirmation from the Office of State Procurement to make sure that your information, you haven't missed something, or that you have a confirmation of what you're seeing as far as that contract. With all this, we have available legal resources out there, specifically on the procurement code, the public bid that was in Module 2, and other aspects of these resources, which can be found on the LLA's website under Resources Legal Assistance. Would strongly suggest, if you have questions going through this process, or if you just need some reaffirmation on some of these steps, give myself or Angela a call. We're always happy to help you kind of walk through this, or kind of the questions you may still need to ask Office of State Procurement. Anything we can do to help, just feel free to give us a call. Thank you.